This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's military begins live fire exercises in response to US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's controversial visit to Taiwan.
Our other headlines: Ukraine's first grain ship is cleared to sail to Lebanon after an inspection in Turkish waters.
Europe's gas war with Russia intensifies. Germany's Chancellor speaks out over the stranded Gazprom turbine that Moscow refuses to take back.
And scrapping the best before dates on shopping, but will it reduce the amount of food that we waste?
China has begun a live-firing military exercise in response to the controversial visit to Taiwan of the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Pelosi is the most senior politician from the United States to visit in 25 years. Her trip, as part of a tour of Asia, prompted anger in Beijing after she ignored requests not to travel to Taiwan.
Our correspondent Meng Qingsheng reports.
In response to Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the Chinese military has carried out a series of targeted military operations. Its spokesperson says the military will take actions to, quote, thwart the interference by external forces and the separatist schemes for Taiwan independence. Following Pelosi's arrival, the PLA Eastern Theater Command, which covers 6 provincial regions including Fujian province, declared that it would conduct joint military operations around the Taiwan island from Tuesday evening. These include naval air joint drills, long-range combat fire live shooting, and conventional missile firepower test.
The operations will unfold systematically and extensively with multiple military forces. The operations include targeted and live-fire precision weapon drills, like joint blockades, air-to-ship attacks, air-to-land strikes, and air control operations. The operations will fully test the weapon and equipment capacity and Army's joint operational ability. We will be ready for any crisis. We sternly warn those who travel to Taiwan with sinister plots and Taiwan independence forces that the Eastern Theater Command has full confidence and ability to defeat any provocations, and we will firmly safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
In a separate announcement, the Chinese military says, starting from midday Thursday to midday Sunday local time, it will conduct important military exercises and training activities, including live-fire drills. The locations cover 6 maritime areas, and their airspace bounded by adjoining lines dotted in a circle around the Taiwan island. For safety reasons, it warns vessels and aircraft not to enter these areas. The military has also been conducting exercises in the South China Sea, East China.
Meng Qingsheng reporting from China's Xiamen, which faces the Strait of Taiwan.
US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi held a news conference with Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen, where she said her visit to the island was to honour the United States' commitment to democracy. China's foreign ministry called it an interference in internal affairs. Our correspondent Dai Kai-yi reports.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Wednesday made clear here China's solemn position on Pelosi's move. He said Pelosi's tour is a complete farce. The U.S. side, under the guise of so-called democracy, is doing the heinous deeds of violating China's sovereignty, and such Taiwan independent separatist forces have betrayed the righteousness of the great national cause. He said these perverse practices will not change the international consensus that there is only one China, nor will they change the historical trend that Taiwan will return to the motherland. China's foreign ministry earlier reacted to the U.S. Speaker's press conference with Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen, where Pelosi said her visit to the island was honoring the United States' commitment to democracy. Spokesperson Hua Chunying refuted the claim, saying upholding democracy has nothing to do with the visit, especially with the United States' current democratic struggles.
As the number 3 official in the U.S. government, in the face of democratic problems in her own country, Pelosi is spending taxpayers' money, using a U.S. military airplane to violate international law, the basic norms of international relations, interfere in other countries' affairs, and undermine their sovereignty and territorial integrity. This can only make the world see the United States' hypocrisy and ugliness more clearly and further bankrupt its credibility.
Well, besides military responses, other countermeasures have also been issued. China's Commerce Ministry earlier announced that the mainland will stop natural sand exports to the Taiwan region, and the mainland has also halted imports of citrus fruits and 2 types of fish products from the Taiwan region. Officials say these suspensions are in line with the mainland's relevant regulations and food safety requirements.
Zai Kai reporting from Beijing. Well, let's gauge the reaction in the United States now, and our correspondent Caroline Malone is watching events in Washington. Caroline, so how is the U.S. reacting?
Well, there's been an opinion piece written by the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that's been published in Tuesday's Washington Post, which is intended, largely for a U.S. audience, but of course it's readable around the world. And in it, she said the Taiwan Relations Act, which was signed more than 40 years ago, is an important pillar of U.S. foreign policy in the Asia-Pacific. It has a framework for economic and diplomatic relationships, and that there's a vow made by the U.S. to defend Taiwan. And she's taking this trip really at a time, she said, when the world faces a choice between autocracy and democracy. This trip, of course, is part of a broader one to the region. At the same time, the White House National Security spokesman John Kirby has said, in answer to questions about Pelosi's visit, that it wasn't up to President Biden to decide if she wanted to go, but that he does respect her decision to go. Let's have more of a listen to what Kirby had to say in full.
There's no reason, as I said yesterday, for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with long-standing U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis, or use it as a pretext to increase aggressiveness and military activity in or around the Taiwan Strait. The United States will not seek and does not want a crisis. We are prepared to manage what Beijing chooses to do. At the same time, we will not engage in saber rattling. We will continue to operate in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific as we have done for decades. We will continue to support Taiwan, defend a free and open Indo-Pacific, and seek to maintain communication with Beijing.
Caroline, what, if any, are the longer-term ramifications of Pelosi's visits in terms of China-United States relations?
Well, we've heard from reporters there, of course, that China has already responded diplomatically, economically and militarily. Fighter jets are in the region, banning food imports from Taiwan to some level. And now they've also summoned the US ambassador to Beijing, Nicholas Burns, to convey the country's protest to the trip. And Beijing, of course, has said the trip would have a severe impact on US-China relations. Those ongoing military exercises and drills will probably see until Sunday clearly a reaction as well. And these are more serious military drills than we've seen before. At the same time, though, the US diplomatically is saying there's really no need for this strong reaction. Pelosi is going to continue her Asia tour. Today she's in South Korea. At the same time, we know the schedule definitely of the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and he doesn't seem to have plans to meet with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, even though they are actually both at an ASEAN foreign ministers meeting in Cambodia this week. There is a chance, of course, they could meet off schedule. But here in Washington, at the same time, Pelosi's trip is widely being supported, really, by lawmakers on Capitol Hill, many saying that she had every right to go, even though, of course, everyone can see there's now clear tension over it with US-China relations.
Caroline, thank you for that. Our correspondent Caroline Malone in Washington.
The EU has called for tensions to be resolved through dialogue. A spokesperson said the EU has an interest in preserving peace and the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Appropriate channels of communication should be maintained to reduce risks of miscalculation. They added the EU and member states remain committed to the EU's One China policy.
Well, let's talk to Stephen Parry, the chairman of the 48 Group Club, a London-based non-profit organisation dedicated to promoting trade between China and the United Kingdom. Stephen, in the free world, are entitled to decide for themselves where to visit. Their itineraries shouldn't be amended in Beijing, should they?
I think most international politicians who travel at the leadership of their government, of their president or their prime minister. And they usually do it because they can add to their country's interests.
Is one of the unintended consequences of this response that Taiwan is brought even further into the fold of the free world and China alienates friends?
I'm not sure it's of that significance. Of course it is today, but you know, business people looking at this situation would be as surprised to see Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan as they would to see the chairman of the National People's Congress on the steps of Capitol Hill. These are not the normal places where these people tend to go. It's probably, you know, going to be of less significance in the long term. It's a stir for the moment. I think, you know, President Biden had it right. This is probably not a good time for a trip like this to be happening. And I think that it just needs to, we'll need to move on now.
But for decades, members of the United States Congress, including previous speakers of the House, have traveled to Taiwan. She isn't the first. What's changed?
Well, I think we've got a situation which has been going on. I don't know whether your viewers are aware. This has been going on for 80 years. That the United States has been backing the Kuomintang against the Communist Party of China. In that time, Taiwan has developed pretty well, and China has developed amazingly, hasn't it? So despite this tension between the Kuomintang historically and the independence-minded party now, and the Chinese Communist Party, everybody's found a way to get on and to develop business and develop, if not relationships, at least communications. We're in a bit more of a difficult phase right now. America has reappeared in Asia, and some people are very content with that, and some people are a little bit concerned. I think what most things would take from this trip is, do we want to end up like the Middle East, fighting each other? I don't think they do, and I think they would be concerned that the calmer minds that have said, let's move on, let's not let this get out of hand, that's probably what business thinks, that's probably what many people in the region are thinking right now. Let's move on.
Stephen, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Stephen Parry, the chairman of the 48 Group Club in London.
Well, Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan contributed to a dip on the US market. Let's talk now to our correspondent, John Terrett, who's in New York. John, what has Wall Street's reaction been to this?
Well, I think a sense of relief. You know, it's happened now. It's over. I think a lot of people on Wall Street do think the trip was reckless and dangerous and provocative and unnecessary, certainly at this time. But, of course, from Nancy Pelosi's perspective, she's likely to be out as the Speaker of the House in November if all the polls are right at the moment. So this was her last hurrah on the international stage. And, you know, I think you have to remember she is the third in line to the presidency. That's the thing about being the Speaker. If anything were to happen to President Biden or Kamala Harris, she would be the president. So, you know, she's significant and not so significant all at the same time. And, of course, I think while we have a sense of relief here on Wall Street, we also have to recognize that we now face 4 days of military test firing and military activities in and around the island of Taiwan. And it could be a long week. It could be a difficult weekend. Wall Street doesn't know for certain, although at the moment it's rallying fairly strongly, as I will illustrate in just a second. But we're coming off the back of 2 days in which we've had markets sharply down, and they've been the worst 2 days since June. Especially bad when Nancy Pelosi and the delegation were going in on Tuesday. The moment they left, she's now in Seoul in South Korea, will go on to Tokyo. The markets picked up again. But I will tell you this, Wall Street is very worried about the trade restrictions that Beijing has imposed, including citrus fruits and fish. I gather no sand is going over from Fujian province and the mainland to Taiwan for the time being. There are air traffic restrictions, sea lane restrictions. Wall Street's worried that there could be some kind of clash with shipping, or indeed, God forbid, the USS Ronald Reagan and her carrier fleet, which is in the area, just in case. So all of this is a worry, but Wall Street is most concerned, most worried that there will be some kind of extended blockade of Taiwan semiconductor exports. And that's happening because, of course, there's a real shortage of supply of those in the world at the moment. So they're very concerned that whatever Beijing is saying, they might actually end up blocking those microchip exports after the military exercises finish on Sunday. At the moment, though, they're not thinking too much about that. The Dow is up a solid 1% after 2 days of losses. Guys?
Well, John, let's come back to those chips, because Nancy Pelosi held talks with Taiwan's biggest chip maker when she was there.
Well, apparently so. Apparently this is reported. Now, no one knew this was on the agenda. I think we didn't know quite what was going on the Wednesday visit. I should say, by the way, I think it's very important to point out, this visit, it was in an official government plane. It could not have happened without the Congressional Travel Office working, the White House's blessing, even though they didn't want to go, and the Pentagon as well. But anyway, most of it was government business, which you would understand. But we are told, it is being reported, that she also met with the bosses of TSMC, which is the Taiwan semiconductor company. It's the most valuable company in Taiwan. It's the biggest contract maker of microchips in the world. So in other words, if you want a microchip or a series of them made, you can go to TSMC and they will make it for you. It's based in the north of the island. Of course, it's all about microchips at the moment. Chips with everything, really, to quote Arnold Wesker, because, you know, we've got the Chips Plus Act that was signed into law last night by President Biden. This is designed to offer tax breaks and credits and other incentives for big microchip companies to open more factories here. It'll benefit the likes of Intel and Texas. And Wall Street is very worried now because of this blockade that may go on after Monday. They're worried about the military exercises getting out of hand. They're worried about a potential blockade. So Wall Street says, well, Beijing, the next move is up to you, and we're going to be looking on anxiously while this is going on.
John, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, John Terrett in New York.
The German car giant BMW says second quarter earnings are down by almost a third. The automaker has also lowered its output forecast for the rest of the year. Earnings before tax fell 31% to $3.4 billion in the 3 months to June, despite revenues rising overall on strong sales of electric vehicles. BMW warned the energy crunch and the cost of living crisis will have an impact on profit margins in its key European markets.
Shares in the trading platform Robinhood have risen by more than 12% after it announced job cuts and posted a smaller than expected quarterly loss. The company said it was cutting nearly 800 employees due to high inflation and a falling cryptocurrency market. Its revenue fell 44% in the second quarter of this year.
The CEO of the dating app Tinder, Renate Nyborg, is leaving the company after less than a year in the role. Her exit is part of a series of management changes at Tinder announced by the parent company, Match Group. It comes as Match reported second quarter results that missed Wall Street expectations.
Warner Brothers has cancelled the release of the much-anticipated Batgirl movie after poor initial reviews. The film, starring Michael Keaton, had been due to open in cinemas and stream on HBO next year. But studio bosses made the highly unusual move after critics, given an advance viewing, described it as irredeemable. It puts the film amongst the most expensive cancelled cinematic projects ever.
And we've got more cinema later. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the escape of cinema, how Ukraine's film festival is a welcome diversion from the war and a celebration of homegrown talents.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Soaring energy prices, surging inflation, strained supply chains. As costs spiral and goods run short, people are feeling the heat. Join us for a special new series, Crunch Time, starting August the 1st, here on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The first ship to leave a Ukrainian port carrying grain exports is now on its way to Lebanon after passing inspection off the coast of Istanbul. Russia's invasion of Ukraine kept dozens of grain ships in Ukraine's ports, exacerbating a global food shortage.
The shipment comes after Turkey and the United Nations brokered a deal to release 25 million tons of grain stuck in Ukraine. Our correspondent Michal Bardavit reports from Istanbul.
Yes, finally, the ship has sailed. The Sierra Leone flagged ship Razzoni has passed through the Bosphorus Strait behind me, and now it's on its way to its final destination, which is the port of Tripoli in Lebanon. It spent the night anchored off one of Istanbul's coasts, and the inspections took place there. It had representatives from Turkey, from the United Nations, Russia, and Ukraine board the ship. The inspection lasted about 3 hours. They tried to make sure that it wasn't carrying any weapons or any other non-food items, and after that they gave the go-ahead for the ship to continue on its way, and that has paved the way actually for other vessels that are stuck in Ukrainian ports to also follow the same route, which also shows that the grain initiative actually does work. It has operated smoothly and safely, which is very critical, of course, at this point. There was a statement made by the United Nations saying that the JCC, which is the Joint Coordination Center, which has been established in Istanbul with representatives, again, with Turkey, UN, Russia, and Ukraine. The JCC will use this voyage in its ongoing work on fine-tuning procedures and processes to enable the continuation of safe passage of commercial vessels across the Black Sea under the initiative. So we can expect potentially that in the upcoming days we can hear news of other vessels that can leave Ukrainian ports from Black Sea and once again take the same route, follow it here, carry out inspections and go to their final destinations.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has criticised Russia over its apparent refusal to take back a key turbine used to pump gas between the two countries.
He said there was no reason it shouldn't be put back into service on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which has seen supply levels cut significantly in recent weeks. Our correspondent Trent Murray reports.
Well, this is a special gas turbine which has found itself somewhat stranded in Germany and at the centre of an energy dispute that involves Canada, Germany and Russia. It's a key part of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline which feeds Russian gas directly into Western Europe. The turbine was being serviced in Montreal last month, but before its return, the Canadian government stepped in and stopped it coming back, citing sanctions against Russia. Pointing then to the missing part, Russia began reducing gas supplies, prompting fears over energy security. That then in turn put the German government in an awkward position because Berlin then had to convince Canada to bend the rules and let the turbine come back. But despite all of the trouble, Chancellor Scholz now says Moscow won't take it back off Germany's hands.
What is important to me is to make clear that this turbine can be deployed at any time and that it can be used. There is nothing standing in the way of its onward transport to Russia, except that Russian buyers have to indicate that they also want the turbine and provide the necessary information for the custom transport to Russia. All other approvals have been obtained.
This disagreement comes as Nord Stream 1 continues to pump gas at only 20% of its total capacity, prompting worries over energy supplies in winter, with the Chancellor calling on Germans to cut electricity use now so that gas can be conserved for the colder months. While Gazprom says that export paperwork remains the problem with the turbine, Berlin insists it's all part of a pattern of excuses being made to mask energy being used as a weapon against Germany over the country's support for Ukraine. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
So what's Russia saying about the hold-up in returning this turbine? Let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow, and a reminder that journalists in Russia are working under media laws which restrict what they can report. Stuart, what is the latest from the Kremlin on this?
Well, Gazprom, Russia's state-owned energy exporter, says it's entirely down to the European Union and poorly drafted sanctions, which mean it does not believe it's able to get this turbine back into Russia, that the UK, Canadian and European Union sanctions would have to be removed, the ones that relate to the import and export of gas equipment, for it to be able to take that compressor station back, take that turbine back, install it in the compressor station. But also Gazprom is warning that right now only 1 of 6 turbines are workable in operation. The other one's taken offline due to them coming close to the end of their life and have been prevented from being used by Russia's technology regulator. And it says that as well as this Canadian turbine, in the next few months it's going to be impossible to get these other ones repaired as well, leaving just 1 turbine pushing gas from Russia to Europe, and that one will eventually run out of steam in around autumn or winter. So all of this, says, the only way for it to be cleared up is for the institutions that have imposed sanctions on Russia to either make it very clear that there are documents, and to provide Russia with documents that say it can avoid these sanctions, or to remove these sanctions completely.
So the first Ukrainian grain ship has now safely arrived into Istanbul. Has there been any comment on that?
Well, Russia is an integral partner in this arrangement, of course, between Russia, with Ukraine, Turkey and the United Nations, and it was part of that group of officials that went on board the ship, those 20 officials, to make sure that nothing untoward was on board, people or cargo. And the importance for Russia in making sure that these exports can go ahead is, for one, making sure that it's not seen on the international stage as a country which is preventing anything that might alleviate the very dire food shortage situation and food price situation, but also in allowing these discussions to happen between Ukraine and the United Nations and Turkey. Russia also allowed itself to be brought into a deal with the United Nations, which addressed its concerns specifically about exporting its grain and its fertilizers. It says that sanctions imposed by the US and the European Union have affected those, not necessarily directly. The financial sanctions imposed, making countries outside Russia concerned about importing Russian goods. Well, this agreement, this memorandum of understanding, Russia says, makes sure that sanctions will not be imposed that affect its exports. And so for Russia, this is something that's also very beneficial.
Stuart, thanks very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
Mykolaiv, one of Ukraine's hardest-hit cities in the invasion, has been subjected to Russian missile attacks many times a day. Many residents have lost any sense of ordinary life.
Now, one film producer and a group of volunteers are trying to boost morale with screenings of works by homegrown talent. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed reports.
The crowd is sparse. Half the seats are occupied. It's the first public movie screening Mykolaiv residents have been privy to in almost half a year.
Theaters are closed, cinemas, shopping malls, entertainment services, even shops with clothes.
This is one of a series of 7 Ukraine-produced and directed films being screened here over a 5-day period. The aim is to provide respite.
This is a piece of the peaceful life that we all need to reboot. Life in Mykolaiv is loud and it's tense, so this is a break from the tension.
Dubbed the Tactical Pause Film Festival, screenings are held at Mykolaiv's Drama Theatre in the city center. Producers mindful of a potential parallel with the deadly Russian strike on Mariupol's Drama Theatre in March, implemented a series of precautionary planning measures. Registration is mandatory, all attendees are vetted, the location is kept secret until screening day, and movies are only shown during daylight hours, before nightly curfews and intensified strikes get underway.
Another precaution, holding the screenings in an underground shelter.
Organizers are planning screenings for other hard-hit areas and for Ukraine's soldiers.
I want even one viewer, and this is success for me.
A brief pause from reality, perhaps, but total escapism seems impossible. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Mykolaiv, Ukraine.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. BP sees its biggest quarterly profit in 14 years, almost $8.5 billion. Some households face thousands of dollars in energy bills.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's military begins live fire exercises in response to US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's controversial visit to Taiwan. Our other headlines, Ukraine's first grain ship is cleared to sail to Lebanon after an inspection in Turkish waters.
5 of the world's largest energy companies have reported huge profits totaling almost $60 billion in just the second quarter of this year. It comes as millions of households struggle with record-high gas prices and soaring inflation. British oil giant BP reported a record quarterly profit of $8.5 billion, its highest in 14 years. France's Total Energy tripled its adjusted net income to $9.8 billion, powered by rising prices due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. BP's rival, Shell, smashed its profit record last week with earnings of $11.5 billion. And it was a blockbuster result from Chevron as well. The United States company earned $11.6 billion last quarter, while ExxonMobil made an unprecedented $17.9 billion profit. That's nearly 4 times as much as last year and the most for any international oil company in history.
Well, Bill Farron-Price is director of Enverus, a consultancy which provides oil and gas software across the energy spectrum. I asked him what we should make of the sky-high oil company profits and the eye-watering household energy bills.
The reality is that oil and gas is a cyclical business, and BP made heavy losses during that first year of COVID pandemic and is now making extraordinarily high profits, but for reasons that are not entirely its own, which is the externalities of very tight gas supply in Europe, and of course a return to stronger demand after the COVID pandemic, when there's less global capacity to process all of that crude oil into refined products, which of course has sent refining margins through the roof. So it's a complex set of reasons. I agree that it's difficult reading for those who are struggling to make ends meet. But I think, given that the government in the UK has already moved towards imposing a windfall tax, probably the next step for alleviating hardships at the consumer level are probably about reducing tax on fuels. We're already seeing oil prices come down from the highs that we saw in the second quarter, when that was probably the height of the prices, and we're already beginning to see the global economy falter. The US is in a technical recession already. We've seen Chinese growth slow, partly as a result of the COVID shutdowns, and European economies are all showing significant headwinds at the moment, which means that it's quite possible that demand will falter and help fix some of these price problems over the next quarter or two. And that's another way of saying recession risk is at a very high level. So this actually may be a problem whose peak has already passed.
The OPEC Plus group of oil-producing countries says it will raise its output target by 100,000 barrels a day. The Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries and allies, including Russia, agreed to the small increase, which is equal to about 0.1% of global oil demand. The United States had been pushing for a more meaningful supply boost. Oil prices slid 1.5% after the announcement.
Well, the UK motoring organisation, the RAC, says petrol prices are not falling fast enough or in line with wholesale costs. Its research says drivers are paying around $10 more than they should be for a tank of fuel. Let's talk to our correspondent Andrew Wilson, who's following the story. Andrew, this has been a terrible July for drivers in the UK, hasn't it?
Well, it has. I mean, listening to your guest just now, it's clear that the peak prices for fossil fuels at the moment was round about May, starting to level off in June, and should have fallen in July. Now, the RAC, which is the largest motoring organisation in the UK, which constantly charts the variations of fuel price, says that these drops in prices, $114 a barrel down to less than $100 a barrel in July, should have been matched by reductions in the pump. A tank of petrol now costs about $6 less than it did in June, but it should really be, according to the RAC, more like $20 less. So why isn't that being reflected? Well, there's a couple of things they've noticed. First of all, traditionally in the UK, the cheapest place to buy your fuel is from supermarkets. The big chains, the BPs and the Shells, always charge more. Motorway service charge even more than that. But supermarkets like Asda, Sainsbury's, those tend to charge less. They're not doing that this time round. Some of the independent stations are charging prices more in reflection with the wholesale price of oil and gas, but the supermarkets are holding on. So there's a state of flux going on, clearly, with the big oil companies showing huge profits, but waiting to see where this is going. We've got the Bank of England announcing interest rates tomorrow, almost certainly a 0.5% hike. That's the highest hike in 27 years. So there's still a lot in play at the moment, and none of the industries is prepared to put their money where their mouth is, if you like, to start reflecting wholesale or changing prices at the moment, because they're just not sure what's going to happen next or where the consumer's going to go either.
Andrew, thanks for that. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
Some petrol stations in Hungary have been forced to close after running out of fuel. The government has tried to reduce demand by modifying the price cap brought in last year to keep prices low. But not all drivers are happy, as our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
The news came without warning for commercial drivers in Hungary. The fuel price cap that ensured low prices at the pump will only now apply to private vehicles. For those driving for business, they will now have to pay market prices to fill up.
On Saturday, we paid $1.25 for gas because of the price cap. And later on that same day, at 11 a.m., they announced that we had to pay more money by noon, so they only gave us an hour to adjust.
The move comes after the main refinery for Hungarian fuel, owned by energy company, shut for maintenance, affecting the supply of fuel. The Hungarian government is tapping into a quarter of its strategic fuel reserves to offset the deficit, but market experts believe that these measures only will help them in the short term.
I think mostly from gasoline there will be some problem, because the petrol is much easier to refine, and there is a reservoir from petrol much more than the gasoline.
However, the high demand and low supply of fuel has already had an impact this week. Some of Shell's filling stations shut their operations temporarily. In a statement, they indicated, in order to optimize network operations and labor management, Shell will temporarily suspend operations of 5 filling stations. For private vehicle drivers, it's not clear whether the price cap will remain.
Hungary's government first capped the price of fuel on November of last year to $1.25 per liter, and then had to renew it during the summer. It's set to expire October 1st. The government has not expressed yet whether they will renew that measure.
Burden the MOL, the Hungarian oil company, and not the government. So that means the government will continue this cap.
Experts believe that the fuel supply problems in Hungary's main cities will persist. But what's more troubling for many Hungarians is the lack of fuel in rural areas, where gas stations are typically the last in line to get the fuel they need for their customers. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
Well, that's the situation in Hungary. In neighbouring Croatia, many small independent fuel stations have been forced to close shop after failing to reach a deal with the government on pricing.
It's put more pressure on the country's energy market, which relies heavily on imports. Our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
Robert Valdec is one of Croatia's most recognizable TV faces. Some 11 years ago, he moved from Croatia's busy capital, Zagreb, to his simple rural home close to the border with Slovenia. After all that time heating his home with natural gas, Robert now fears that won't be an option for this winter.
I intend to buy at least 4 to 6 cubic meters of firewood for winter, and even firewood became more expensive. Last year it was around $50 for 1 cubic meter, while now one cannot find it cheaper than $70.
Beyond firewood and natural gas, energy prices in general have skyrocketed in Croatia in the past few months. Right behind consumers, those feeling the squeeze are the owners of small fuel stations.
They blocked our retail prices, and now we have the situation with the so-called blue diesel, which is for our farmers only. For the last 2 weeks, I cannot buy it from the refinery, as the price there is higher than the selling price allowed by the government, and it is forbidden by law to sell it with a price lower than I purchased it.
Their repeated pleas to the government to fix this issue have gone unanswered. Now, many are forced to close their stations, as they cannot either break the law to stay in business or bear any more losses incurred selling other fuel types.
In this case, the small distributors have a problem. Most of them would likely cease to exist as this goes on. If the recession arrives, the demand will fall, and then the oil prices. But now they have to close their businesses, with bleak prospects of reopening in the future.
General prospects are not just bleak for the owners of small fuel stations. The entire nation looks at the incoming winter with unease.
It is 38 degrees here near Zagreb, and it seems the winter is eons away. But regardless, people are concerned about what they will do when the frost starts biting in winter. Firewood is the answer for the rural areas, But what's going to happen in the cities is anybody's guess. Aljoša Milenković, CGTN, Zlec, near Zagreb.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Business is blooming. How flower sellers cash in as China celebrates its Valentine's Day.
This week on Razor, the power of red light to recharge retinal cells, and measuring the intelligence of birds by seeing if they understand magic.
Corvids use these intricate techniques or tactics of deception, which resemble some of the tactics that we do.
So they're doing magic with their mates?
They do a sleight of beak, if you will.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Sri Lanka's new president says bailout talks with the International Monetary Fund will restart this month. In his first major speech to Parliament, Ranil Wickremesinghe also called on lawmakers to form a unity government to help resolve the country's economic crisis. He took office last month after his predecessor, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, fled the country.
Yemen's warring parties have agreed to extend a United Nations brokered truce for another 2 months. The ceasefire was first negotiated in April and has led to the longest period of calm in the country in more than 7 years. The United Nations is hoping for a more permanent deal to end a conflict that's killed hundreds of thousands of people and pushed millions into poverty.
The U.S. state of Kansas has voted overwhelmingly to retain abortion rights in its constitution. It's the first state to put the issue to a referendum since the Supreme Court ruled in June to overturn constitutional protections for abortion. Ballots are also expected in Kentucky, California and Vermont in coming months.
Emergency crews are fighting a massive fire at a warehouse on the outskirts of Moscow. 1 person has died, 13 have been injured, and 1 is still missing at the warehouse belonging to the e-commerce firm Ozon. Authorities say the blaze covers 35,000 square metres.
The year after wildfires devastated the Greek island of Evia, residents are still waiting to receive compensation.
The Greek government promised them €20 million to help rebuild communities after the fires destroyed homes and businesses, leaving some people with little to no income. Our correspondent Evangelos Ipsas reports.
Large green patches of new plants have started to grow among the burned trees in northern Evia. It was in those same charred forests that bees produced Greece's best honey. It is also here where Stathis beehives once were. A year ago, multiple fires broke out in Greece, burning thousands of hectares of farmland and pine forest, as well as hundreds of houses and forcing the evacuation of thousands. After a long heat wave last summer with temperatures up to 47 degrees recorded, over 50,000 hectares of farmland went up in flames in northern Evia alone. 3 people lost their lives and thousands had to flee. Today, landscapes on the island remain almost apocalyptic, and the impact on many sectors is dramatic. Yet nature is growing back, and so are people's lives. But for some like Stathis, going back is proving more difficult than others. The destruction of the blaze is still visible here in northern Evia, from the hills all the way down to the sea. It is believed that 1/3 of the island's forest land was ravaged by the fires. According to the Greek Prime Minister, it's the worst ecological disaster that the country has seen in decades. From the beginning of the wildfires, Prime Minister Mitsotakis announced an aid relief for those affected. A year on, help has yet to arrive to Stathis.
We haven't seen a single euro. We were told that we would be the first ones to receive some help. People from the government came over and estimated the damage done and made me sign so that I could receive money. But nothing has arrived. It's really sad because I lost my work, my income, and most importantly, my life.
As the summer period gets into full swing, Greece is once again locked in battle wildfires, battling fronts in Crete, the Peloponnese, and outside the Greek capital. So far, the country seems better prepared, as more than 200 foreign firefighters and equipment have been deployed. But that leaves Stathis wondering if it would be enough if fires on a similar scale come back this summer. Evangelos Ipsas for CGTN in northern Evia.
Waitrose has become the latest British supermarket to scrap best before dates on fresh produce, which indicate when food is at its best. It's part of an effort to cut down on waste by encouraging us not to throw away food that is still safe to eat. Lindsay Boswell is from the charity Fair Share Food.
Well, best before dates are only an indicator to the consumer of whether a product is at its prime condition. And what tended to happen is that people have become slaves to the best before dates, and so when something is past its best before date, which by just logical definition of that sentence means that it's still perfectly fine, just over time it might get a little bit staler or a little bit less fresh, then people have been throwing food away. And the reason why best before dates were there before was really to allow the market to manage their stock control. And what Waitrose are very sensibly doing is trying to look at minimising food waste.
So will removing these best before dates work? Do people know enough to be sure when food is safe to eat?
Well, that's a really good question, Robin. And if it hasn't got a date on it, then people are going to need to use their own savviness and their own logic and just look at something, sniff it. Best before dates only apply to things that aren't likely to hurt you, like, for example, biscuits. And they'll just make their own mind up as to whether that biscuit is too stale to eat or whether it's absolutely fine. So this should minimise food waste and should enable more good food to be consumed and eaten, which is what it's designed for.
So how much food is wasted currently that doesn't need to be?
Well, in the United Kingdom, it's around about 2 million tonnes of food a year. Now, just to put that into a global perspective, 1/3 of all the food as a planet, humankind, that we grow goes to waste. 1/3 of it. So if we could solve the waste problem and we could get that food to where it's needed, then we would have no hunger on this planet at all. Now, I know that's a simplistic thing to say, but when you think of the amount of water, nutrients and energy that goes into making food, to then waste 1/3 of it, and to put it into context, if food waste was a nation, was a country, it would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter on planet Earth. So it's a massive problem and we need to solve it.
So other supermarkets are also reviewing their best before date policy, but is there more that they should be doing?
There's more that all the supermarkets in the UK should be doing. They're really committed to addressing store-level surplus, store-level waste, and these stories of 5-10 years ago of the bins at the back of the supermarket, those have gone, and there are charities collecting on a daily basis from supermarkets up and down the land. But where the real prize is back in what's called the supply chain. That's the factories and the distribution warehouses, and right back to, indeed, the largest area of surplus is the farmers' fields. And that's the area that Fair Share do a huge amount of work in, trying to access and gain good quality surplus food, why would go to waste, and get it to frontline charities that are using it as part of a safety net for people who are vulnerable.
China's celebrating its equivalent of Valentine's Day, also known as the Qixi Festival. People mark the occasion by giving gifts, particularly flowers. Our correspondent Yang Jinghao has been to one of the world's largest flower markets.
Bustling with people even late at night. This is how the Dounan flower market in the city of Kunming has been like during the past week, as the traditional Qixi Festival approaches.
The Qixi Festival, also known as Chinese Valentine's Day, falls on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month. Its growing popularity in recent years has spurred the local market for related products, in particular flowers.
Wang Yangbing is a flower broker. Has been receiving a growing number of orders from his clients across the country.
In normal times, I usually deliver 7,000 to 10,000 flowers to my clients each day. In the past week, I delivered some 30,000 to 50,000 a day.
And the prices have also kept rising, especially for roses.
The price of the variety called Pink Snow Mountain has increased from about 20 yuan a bundle to some 60 yuan. Those with better quality can even be sold at about 80 yuan.
Kunming, hailed as the city of eternal spring, welcomes crowds from all of the country during the summer vacation, and Dounan Market is a popular destination. Some 1.35 million people visited the market in the first half of this year, 13% more compared to the same period last year.
The market is famous, and with the Qixi festival around the corner, I want to buy some flowers for my girlfriend. It's very impressive here. I've never seen such a big flower market.
The flowers here are really fresh and beautiful, and the prices are affordable, but the delivery costs are a little bit high.
Last year, a total of 8.3 billion flowers were traded here, hitting a record high. The market expects a better performance this year as the country is recovering from the impact of the COVID pandemic. Yang Jinghao, CGTN, Yunnan Province.
Borge Brender is Managing Director of the World Economic Forum.
He started his working life as a speechwriter at the Norwegian Parliament. He told us that was where he learned the importance of always leaving the audience wanting more.
So my first job was as a speechwriter for our former Prime Minister in the Parliament in Norway. The first time I drafted the speech, he said, you have to make it much shorter because most politicians do talk much longer than people appreciate. So you should end when people still want you to continue. I think this is the century of talentism. So those companies that want to do well in the future also have to be attractive for these young talents. You have to care about the environment, you have to care about your workplace, you have to show flexibility, and you're not better than the talent you recruit. And that is really a great silver lining for the young people.
And to find out more, search for My First Job on CGTN's social media accounts.
The headlines again. China's military begins live fire exercises in response to US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's controversial visit to Taiwan.
Our other headlines: Ukraine's first grain shipment is cleared to sail to Lebanon after an inspection in Turkish waters.
And Europe's gas war with Russia intensifies. Germany's Chancellor speaks out over the stranded Gazprom turbine that Moscow refuses to take back.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.